Hey everybody, Scott here. Another episode of let me get this glare out of your way. See if I can move. There we go. That looks better. Much better. All right, yeah. So I wanted to do a reaction video real quick. I ran across. This video is taken. This reaction video is going to be about From the Line, which is an atheist call-in show. I like the show. I watch it, and I really like the host, Forest Valkai, and he's got another host with him as well, uh, Zina, and they are actually debating an idealist, and so this is going to be interesting. So I want to kind of do a real live debate and just give some real live thoughts before I watched it. I wanted to record it so we can get like a real live reaction on this stuff. So it's Zina, Forest Valkai and Zina is her name. I've never seen her before. Anyways, I'm going to let this roll from the part where he introduces himself as an idealist, and we'll check it out.
I mean, I'm an idealist, so I think we can start from there. That it's reasonable to say that consciousness is fundamental, and out of consciousness arise things like perspectives. So first, you like primary substrate of awareness, out of which come ideas and concepts. But all those ideas and concepts are transient, and after we die, we just go back to that fundamental subjectivity that God is.
Cool. So like the force.
When you're saying force, you're talking about like energy, maybe? And that either has to be like kinetic or potential.
No, I was saying like the force, like from Star Wars, where like when you die, you just go back to this kind of thing that's all encompassing and flows through everybody.
See, right here, this kind of, I already know he isn't familiar with idealism or non-dualism. So I can already tell that this Forrest, he's kind of locked into a paradigm, the dualistic paradigm of this and that, subject, observer. And because of this language, it's going to be real hard discussing this concept with them because these folks are locked in to their materialist paradigm to the point where it doesn't make sense. They don't know how to shift their assumption because they forget that materialism is also an assumption. It's just a very intuitive one. And so instead of questioning their intuition, they're just going to say how the language presents a contradiction somewhere down the line. I bet you that's what's kind of going to happen, but we'll see. Just my thoughts.
Stuff.
I don't know that the force would be thought of as conscious or omnibenevolent, though. I may be wrong. I'm a little bit rusty on my George Lucas.
Okay, well, so you are saying that this God is omnibenevolent.
Oh, sure.
Okay, and just a couple more questions really quick just to make sure I know what we're talking about. Is this God also omnipotent?
Yes.
Okay. And then one more, actually two more, sorry. Is it also omniscient? Is it all-knowing? Is it all three omnis?
I might need your help with this one because as far as omniscient goes, I would say that all knowledge is either latent or expressed from within this entity. So in that sense, omniscient, yeah.
Okay, we'll put a question mark.
I like how succinct he is. I like how fast he gives his answers instead of this long bloviation of an explanation. Like it's not necessary. You have to understand from where your interlocutor is sitting. He asked a question. He's just expecting the answer very succinctly as the question was. And I always try to do this. It's not good to bloviate, and I like that.
Next to that one. And then last but not least, does this God have the ability to think, to make decisions, and to take actions on its own accord?
In order to do that, this God would have to localize and become like you or your host or me. So in order to think you need a mind which is correlated with brains, and that's a weakness. So God would have no need for thinking because he's omniscient. He would already know all things. So in order to think, he'd have to localize, just like you'd have to localize within a dream in order to fly, for instance.
So non-thinking, what about the other two, about being able to take actions and influence physical reality of its own free will?
No, I don't believe that God is an agent, because agency would frustrate omniscience.
Right. I'm glad he answered that. I'm glad he answered that way. So this is why I never call into these shows myself to have these kind of conversations, because this definition really doesn't match even the classical view of a God. A God has to be conscious, willful, and personal, answer of prayers to even matter. Because if a God isn't any of those things, able to do any of those things, then what's the point? You're pretty much just an atheist. Can be the argument there, you know. You're more of a deist in that case, and you know, and that really depends too. No, God label really doesn't apply, but I think this guy just wanted to use theism as an end to have this conversation, in my opinion. But we'll see.
Okay, so just to be clear, I've got a monotheistic God, that is omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and maybe based on the way you squint your eyes, maybe omniscient. It is non-thinking. I got that about summed up.
So I would say, yeah, this call what he's making here. So I think what he's saying here is that this God or this greater mind, like substrate, is not meta conscious, which is similar to what Bernardo Kastrup says regarding these things. So that's where he's going with that. Not a meta conscious.
I think so.
Okay, groovy. All right, we'll go right ahead. Zina, do you want to kick us off?
Sometimes life can be a little messy, but with Nick and Ashley.
Sure, I can start. Well, first of all, when I, asked to do this question first, this is kind of like one of the interesting topics and questions I have when it comes to God. I just think to start, it's more so just like when we say that this God is the God that exists, I think that like as we started, what's most important is defining God. And it seems to me that we're kind of defining God as like almost like the collective conscious in some way. There are many different ways to describe this. And I think we see different interpretations in different ways, but you kind of define God as some collective conscious. Do you think that's like kind of a word that maybe, or phrase that maps on to this concept of God that you have?
Sure. Yeah, I think that's fair. Like, it's just God is the fundamental thing out of which everything else temporarily, everything else is a temporary excitation out of this fundamental thing that's God.
Like a field.
Right. Yeah. And
quantum field.
Yeah. And I think when we talk about God in this way, I think it's interesting. And this is why I call myself agnostic, because there's so many different interpretations of what God is. Like, for example, when we look at Spinoza like says things that are somewhat similar to what you're saying, and that he defines things, some things are like forms, some things are substances. But innately, we kind of all are dependent and contingent upon each other and come from something like similar. Like, for example,
well, that's pantheism or panentheism, perhaps. Not really idealism exactly. I think these folks are a little rusty on these sort of things, but I can see why she's saying that, and it's because he's invoking the God language when describing his version of idealism.
At the start of the universe, if we look at things even just like from like a metaphysical level, began and from that point in which the universe started to expand, we all came from that. So in essence, we all did come from something similar. And then when we go to consciousness, I think that's where it gets a little bit interesting. I guess I have a couple questions. In one, how you define consciousness, and two, I think that even if this God doesn't exist, I think it is important to make a distinction kind of between the way in which people kind of feel about or talk about like a Christian or a Muslim God versus
definitions are important.
a God sort of like this. But I guess, can I get your definition of consciousness?
Yeah, I borrow the definition of consciousness from David Chalmers, who coins the hard problem of consciousness. And he says that consciousness is what it is like to be. So presumably, it isn't like anything to be a book. Therefore, a book is not conscious. But it is like something to be you. It is like something to be me. And similarly, it is like something to be God. It's a mode of being. So it's not a property of anything. It's a way of being, or it's a mode of being.
Right.
Really quick, Lamont, do you have us on Bluetooth or headphones or anything like that?
No, just on my phone.
Okay, cool. There's just a couple of interferences and some sounds. I was seeing if we could fix it. If we can, it's no big deal. Okay, so we can go on with what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's it. I borrowed the same definition from David Chalmers. I try to avoid neologisms.
Yep. That's fine.
So I guess just one more question is, when you say we all go back to this consciousness, because I agree that we are having some experience. I don't know. I think some questions we also have is like, is consciousness a thing? Does it really exist? And that is it material, et cetera? And when you say that we go back to consciousness, what does that look like for you? And how are we able to tell that that is the case?
Good questions. Good questions.
I would say that when you die, the object of experience melts away. I don't know this for sure, so I like to start by just saying, like, look, I don't know. And I think that's really important to start with that. But I think that's one of the main goals of brain, is to separate this from that, here from there, agent versus arena. And we can even see, like with experiments done with high dose psychedelic drugs, when you're in a high dose psychedelic state, the default mode network shuts down, the task centric network shuts down. People experience what they call ego death, where like the agent arena distinction kind of collapses, and you go into this mode, which is kind of like pure subjectivity. And this brain state on high dose psychedelics is like the closest we can come to being brain dead in a safe and repeatable way. And yet this is the most.
So he's saying that qualities of consciousness are not affected, or the quality of consciousness is affected by the drugs or by the psilocybin or the DMT or whatever the substance may be. It's kind of like drinking alcohol. It'll get you drunk. So what his argument here is going to be is that while external forces can change the quality of consciousness, the prerequisite is still consciousness. So there's a difference here. I think he ought to make a distinction between mind and consciousness, because all of these drugs affect the mind, right? So this just for semantic reasons. There's the mind, which is like the modes of consciousness, you would say. But consciousness is always aware. So like with Phineas Gage, there was this example of a guy who had a pole or something that went up his chin and out of his head, and it almost killed him, but it missed, and it affected his brain, and so his whole personality changed and everything. And a lot of time materialists will use this as proof that consciousness, or the brain, creates consciousness. No, the brain modulates consciousness. It's sort of like on idealism, that is. On idealism, this isn't really a defeater. It's mainly just an observation that we're able to change, seemingly change our conscious mode by ingesting certain things, hurting your head, blah, 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 blah. Anyways, I'm talking too much. And let's get back.
Most exciting experience that, people can have in their lives sometimes.
Yeah. So I suppose going back to this consciousness, like, I know no one really knows what happens when we die, but I suppose if we don't, were you saying that you don't necessarily know if we go back to this consciousness? Like you aren't actually sure if that's the case, or are you speculating? Or
Well, I mean, I think it would be my best guess. I think it would be the most skeptical thing to say, because consciousness cannot be doubted because
Right.
it's the prerequisite for doubt, and it cannot be an illusion because it's a prerequisite for illusion. You can't have an illusion without being conscious. You can't doubt without being conscious. And so I think that it's a safe bet to prioritize it over the things that are emergent from it. So, I mean, even though I don't know, I mean, it might be the case that when we die, consciousness dies too. But from my perspective, consciousness never developed. It never grows. It's always been the same. My mind has grown. My thoughts have
Good.
developed. You know,
Good job.
I've become more mature.
There he goes. He made a distinction between consciousness and mind. Awesome.
But consciousness seems to just have this thing where it stays the same. It's just running in the background. And I have no reason to believe that when my biology dies, that consciousness will. That would just be a leap.
I think I suppose
questions whenever you're ready.
Yeah, go ahead. Actually, go ahead.
Okay, it's fine. I didn't want to derail you. I'm just telling you. Oh my God, that's a wild thing to say.
Yeah. Look at his face. He's like, that's a wild thing to say. It's because his assumption is just simply different. They're just starting with two different assumptions. That's the only problem. That's the only reason it seems crazy, because his starting assumption is material. The other guy's starting assumption is consciousness, phenomenal consciousness. And it looks like they just cannot understand what he's talking about because they're so embedded in that assumption of materialism.
I would start by asking about just the... Sorry?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I apologize. Go ahead.
You're fine. So I want to start with the last thing you said, and then I want to work my way backwards. Can you please give me any example that we can actually test and observe and know of consciousness existing absent matter?
Let's see what he'll say to that question.
Well, I can't give you an example of consciousness existing because of matter. I mean, because of my material body, you can have signs of consciousness.
Oh, wow. So Forrest says he can. This ought to be interesting.
You have evidence that consciousness emerges from brain states? There's a Nobel Prize waiting for you if that's the case.
That's pretty much like, granted, the hard problem of consciousness about what it really is and blah, 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 blah. Like, sure, we don't know exactly what it is, but I think it's overwhelmingly evident that it is at least dependent on matter to exist. It is emergent.
Here we go. The mind is dependent on the brain. The mind is dependent on matter. On idealism, there is no distinction. This is a non-dualist type of monism. So he needs to engage with the actual view, because he's never going to really disprove idealism, and idealism will never disprove materialism, because the starting assumptions are just different. It's kind of arbitrary in a way, but the arbitrariness goes away when you start doing internal critiques of materialism. If you can do an internal critique of idealism and show some contradictions or some tensions, then you can do a comparison to maybe justify saying that materialism makes more sense or has a better explanation than idealism. But it seems like there's a lot of question begging going on right now.
Property. And we can look back to the earliest understandings of neuroscience and psychology, and really, I guess neuropsychology is this thing, but we can look back to the earliest examples of this, all back to Phineas Gage type shit, and know that the structure of your brain determines quite a bit about how your consciousness is expressed, if indeed it exists at all.
consciousness would have to be real, otherwise you wouldn't be able to talk about anything, including consciousness and modes of consciousness. You couldn't experience different modes of consciousness if consciousness didn't exist. And I'm thinking he means exist in the sense of real. This is where language gets really tricky, because a lot of people talk about existence as only material things. And we're not saying consciousness is a material thing. And that's why people say consciousness doesn't exist. And on that logic, from that definition or usage, that makes sense. And we can go along with that. But I don't think that's what he means. I think he means something else. He means like the colloquial usage.
If that wasn't the case, then we wouldn't be able to dramatically alter somebody's entire consciousness, not just their, basic parts of the personality, but what they're
No, you don't affect their consciousness, you affect their mind.
Aware of, what the information they are able to process about the world around them, how, if at all, they are able to make decisions, like all sorts of things beyond just their personality, but also.
If he's an idealist worth his weight, he'll be able to defeat this argument pretty easy.
Critically including their personality simply
kidding.
by altering parts of their nervous system, mainly their brain. So like when I look across the animal kingdom and I look at all sorts of things that have different levels of consciousness and different kinds of consciousness, all of those things have one thing in common, is that they are made of matter. And I have yet to see any example of any kind of consciousness at all that exists independent of matter. So you might say that I have not done whatever prerequisite test to say conclusively that brains produce consciousness. And I would scoff at that, but like at the end of the day, sure, that can be our hang up. But I can still show you that brains are directly responsible and a major part of the expression of consciousness. And you've got...
That's not being argued against.
Nothing in terms of consciousness exists absence of all of this. So like, that's what I'm asking. Can you give me anything to point to say that consciousness is not the direct result of matter?
Indirectly, you can.
I did with the 2012 study. I don't know if you guys partake.
I'm sorry, would you please? I'm sorry, you were breaking up at the beginning. Please repeat
I can talk about.
And now the idealist is going to go.
Oh, sorry about that. I said, yeah, I'm somebody who partakes. You know what I mean? I'm a big fan.
He's going to go into the psychedelic studies as proof of consciousness outside the brain. I don't really like this argument either, though. Really, I don't.
And of Terence McKenna. So the high-dose psychedelic studies, which is what I brought up before, this is the closest that the brain can get to being brain dead in a safe and repeatable way. And yet, even though the brain metabolism is slowing to a crawl in those instances, this is the most deep and meaningful and colorful and vibrant experience. Most people say.
Yeah, less brain function, more consciousness. But materialists already have an argument for that. And again, we're not talking about modes of consciousness. And then it doesn't really apply equally across the board, because you can affect your brain in such a way that you're put into a coma and you have no memory of what it was like being in the coma. Some people do. Some people say they're conscious during a coma. Some people can, when they come out of a coma, recount conversations that were said in their room while they were in the coma state, months ago or weeks ago or even years ago. I've seen stuff like that, but maybe not always. So I don't think that this is really a compelling argument either way, but that's just me. Maybe you guys disagree. Let me know in the comments.
That they're having in their lives. That's not proof by any means. And, it's not like they haven't found like little tiny, pieces of the, brain communicating in those states. But that's not the only piece of evidence I have. I mean, it's saying that consciousness emerges from brain states just because signs of consciousness are there is making the same mistake of saying that flames are responsible for combustion, right? Combustion can exist without flames.
That's not accurate.
Oh, that's very accurate, Forrest, because you were saying that for certain that the brain, the consciousness depends on large part with the brain, at least in modes of consciousness, depends on brains. And fire depends on combustion in the same way. So that's a good analogy. Let me back this up.
Shows that
No.
Pieces of the brain communicating in those states. But that's not the only piece of evidence I have. I mean, it's saying that consciousness emerges from brain states just because signs of consciousness are there is making the same mistake of saying that flames are responsible for combustion, right? Combustion can exist without flames.
That's not accurate.
Electrostatic can exist without lightning.
So you are missing the point of what I'm saying. So let me use your examples to restate what I'm saying. When brain activity slows to a crawl, we call that a coma.
Oh,
and that's not exactly the most exciting part of a person's life. You are describing an altered mental state brought up.
See, this is why I don't waste time with this argument here, because it doesn't matter.
About my psychedelics. And yes, I have also done plenty of psychedelics in my life, and I have felt some altered brain states. It did not tell me anything new about the existence of consciousness, that it exists.
I don't see why it would. It's just another way that reality is appearing to your mind based on what you've ingested.
Outside of me in any way. And if you have a study that says this person did X amount of acid and now we have a reason to think that consciousness is ethereal and not related to matter at all, I'd love to see that study. But so far, no, I didn't say you did. I didn't say you did. But that is what I am.
Well, if that's not what he said, then why are you bringing it up? You're just bringing up a straw man. Because to say that consciousness is ethereal is a kind of dualism, and idealism is not a dualism. He doesn't really understand idealism, and it's becoming painfully aware. I'm becoming painfully aware of that.
What I'm asking for, I didn't say you did say those things. I am asking you specifically if you have any reason, any serious evidence of consciousness existing outside of, independent of matter. And you're giving me this runaround about psychedelics and stuff. And now you're also...
Why would you beg the question? What makes you think idealism even says consciousness is outside of the brain? I mean, everything is in consciousness. That's the whole point. There's no outside in that way. The outsideness, if you want to call it that, is more like the way that that reality relates to our local version of consciousness. But reality is just one thing. It's our mind that defines and cut things up into parts. That's how we define things. That's how we get meaning in life. But that's not metaphysics.
So talking about this idea that we can, what was the last thing you said? Repeat it about the combustion. Pardon me. I was going to have you repeat it, but I remember exactly how you said it. You said that I'm saying that fire exists on its own, or fire is evidence of combustion, as opposed to, that's not at all what I'm saying. I am pointing to the fact that if you put hydrocarbons and oxygen together with heat, you then produce carbon dioxide and water. That is the chemical formula of combustion. Fire is the physical manifestation of that formula that you can see with your mind, or with your eyes. That is something you can witness.
There you go. You said it right the first time. You see it with your mind. And that's what the guy, mind is dependent on the brain, just like fire is dependent on combustion. But consciousness is not dependent on the brain. Consciousness is a state of being.
Chemical reaction taking place. So I'm not saying that the fire is showing evidence of, like, none of that. I am literally looking for the constituent parts here. And the constituent parts of consciousness is some kind of matter. I would argue it's neurons.
The parts argument, that's defeated by mereological nihilism.
But if you want to say something other than brains, I'm not going to get into nitpicky. It is matter. It is something that is made of atoms and takes up space and has mass. So do you have evidence, again, of any consciousness whatsoever that is verifiably independent of material, of matter?
Okay, based metaphysics. The world looks just as it should if materialism were true. The world also looks just as it should if idealism is true, the world looks just as it should if constitutive panpsychism is true. Physicists don't care about metaphysics. What I'm saying is I'm starting with a different assumption, and I'm
Perfect.
wondering...
I'm glad he said that.
Yes, right, and I'll admit that to you. It may be true that there are some particles or some, I don't know, fairies, pixie dust, whatever it is that you might assume is floating outside of consciousness. But I'm saying consciousness is all we have. It's the thing that we know for sure exists. If you think something exists outside of awareness that gives rise to awareness itself, that is by definition completely blocked from any shred of evidence, even in principle. So if you believe
which means
in that,
you're one twitch away from the hard solipsism issue. And saying,
and so is everyone else. What's the point?
If consciousness is all you know to exist, your consciousness is all you know to exist, you're now in the same issue of saying, I don't know that anything exists besides my brain or besides my mind. It gets you nowhere.
I don't think so.
And meanwhile, you're saying, okay, solve the problem of hard solipsism then.
He doesn't have to. If he has to, then the materialist has to. If no one can solve that problem, then everybody is choosing their own assumption outside of solipsism for probably the same reason. So that's just another empty argument. It's a waste of time. I don't like that argument.
Yeah, I think it's easy. So the materialist wants us to believe in four things. Number one, that you are conscious. Number two, that others are conscious. Number three, that there is something outside of consciousness. And number four, that thing gives rise to consciousness itself. So the idealist takes the first two and just rejects the second two based on skepticism. So I'm going to say, number one, consciousness does exist because I can't doubt it and it can't be illusion. Number two, other people's consciousness exists. And I think even though I can't prove that your consciousness exists, I can believe that it's reasonable based on evidence. If you touch a hot stove, you're going to respond in general.
See, he's going to make a mistake and say, oh, you can't prove it, therefore you're wrong. And then he's going to set himself up because materialists can't solve the hard problem of solipsism either. So does that make materialism wrong? Of course not. This is a dumb conversation.
The same way that I do. So
you just
that
described
doesn't defeat solipsism, as you know. Every philosopher knows hard solipsism can't be defeated.
Yes, which is what I just said to you, and then you said you could easily defeat it, and then you just described faith. You haven't done anything that you claim to be able to do.
Then materialists are of faith as well, because they can't defeat the hard problem of solipsism either.
And I haven't even gotten into the actual serious questions about your God yet. I'm just trying to understand.
You think in order to set up a defeater, you have to have a proof?
Thank you.
I'm just trying to understand.
Defeaters are like, they're not necessarily, proofs like that. They're not empirical proof or evidence. They're just, they're conceptual evidence, maybe. Let me know what you think.
If you're saying that the whole universe looks as exactly as it should if there's materialism and idealism. Okay, on this planet right now, it looks exactly as it should if the sun orbited the Earth. It would look this exact way. How can we actually then verify whether the sun orbits the Earth or the Earth orbits the sun? We can actually do some tests.
By doing an internal critique of these things, because both of them are based on an assumption. Materialism is an assumption, and idealism is an assumption. So what you can do is compare the two philosophies, and you can look for internal contradictions or what is more parsimonious than the other. That's what I do. What has more explanatory power than the other? And do a comparison.
And figure that out. You are now telling me that at the end of the day, you just have to make an assumption, and that isn't reasonable to me.
No.
Then why does he assume materialism?
I have something to say.
Not at all. No, you've misheard me. The universe looks just as it should if there's a teapot orbiting Saturn. I'm asking for evidence that there is such a teapot. You and I both believe and agree that there is awareness.
I have provided you evidence. I have provided evidence. I have provided evidence. I'm going to just put you on mute for a second because you need to hear me. I have provided evidence, and just so many better scientists than I will ever be. I provided just more evidence than we can possibly imagine that consciousness is at least seriously associated with matter.
No, the mind is.
I am asking you for any evidence whatsoever that consciousness can exist absent of matter. And we've gotten nowhere. Zina, you had something that you wanted to say before I bring the Lamont back.
Yeah, for sure. And I think also the biggest fundamental issue we're kind of like running into is like, what does exist truly mean? Like in that, like what do you mean when you say that consciousness exists?
I hope he does answer that question, because that is kind of pivotal about this whole thing of existence, because it implies a material standalone beingness. If something has standalone beingness, it's said to exist. It's tangible. It's objective. Subjective things don't exist because they don't have objective standalone premises for those, if I'm saying that right.
It's like, what are we kind of positing to be that case? I think many materialists will take that like existence means that something is actually like materially like there, like maybe it's made up of matter or something of the sort. I guess like when we talk about consciousness, I suppose the real question is like, what do you mean when you say that consciousness exists, or like that thoughts, or like maybe like a thought exists or an idea?
Exactly. That should probably be ironed out. Maybe this would go far in bridging some understanding.
Exists in general. I think that's like the biggest issue here. And I think when we kind of just like look at like science and biology, or pretty much any just like structured kind of inquiry, we're always looking at associations to determine like cause and effect. And even in philosophy, we have like
that's begging, or that's actually just assuming dualism. You're seeing assuming dualism gives you the absolute truth about these sort of fundamental questions. And it doesn't, because dualism only applies to how we experience reality, not actually to the ontology of reality.
PSR, et cetera, and these ideas that like, you know, such things have effects. And when we look at things being associated with each other multiple times over and over and over again, we come to some conclusion that one thing causes the other thing, et cetera. So when we look at, I think like what we're trying to see here, of course, is like, what we're trying to say here is that we're seeing associations with the brain and matter produce a conscious experience. Like it seems to be the case that conscious experience is associated with like matter and like the brain, and we don't. And I guess the biggest question is what do you mean when you say consciousness exists, and how can something exist if it's not matter, kind of outside of the brain? I guess it's just like a really big question I have in regards to like your theory of consciousness.
Yeah, it's a good thing to unpack. Existence, a thing can not exist and yet still be real if we're going by their definition of exist. And I want to see what the idealist has to say about this. This should be good. I'm very curious.
All right, Lamont, we'll bring you back.
Yeah. So to answer you first, and then I will get to her. I don't know her name after that. But you mentioned consciousness being associated with matter. Nobody doubts that consciousness is associated with matter. In integrated information theory and global workspace theory, that's obvious. I'm not saying that there isn't a correlation between consciousness and brain states. I'm saying that you're just committing a classic causation correlation fallacy. If you know and can demonstrate to me how consciousness arises from states in the brain, I don't think you can. No neuroscientist can. This is the reason that the hard problem persists. But to move on to the question about existence and what I mean by existence, there are two things that I mean.
Yeah, he roasted you there for us. That's why you're smiling like that. You know, he caught you doing a causal fallacy.
Literally means X out and sist to stand. So something that exists can be foregrounded. So if you're listening to my voice, you're ignoring background noises, which means you have foregrounded my voice. There's another form of existence.
Let's hear that again. How did he say it?
But to move on to the question about existence and what I mean by existence, there are two things that I mean. Exist literally means X out and sist to stand. So something that exists can be foregrounded. So if you're listening to my voice, you're ignoring background noises, which means you have foregrounded my voice. There's another form of existence, mind-independent existence. And this is what reductionists are looking for, right? So I think that the only thing which stands up to that test of what can exist mind independently, it would be pure subjectivity. Because what the mind is a subject-object correlation, right? That's what the mind does. It says, I'm here, you're there. I'm this, and I want that. The mind is very correlated with brain states, again. But I think before all of that, there is pure subjectivity, pure awareness before that localization happens.
So you said that I can't demonstrate that, like, there is a correlative thing between a relationship between, or sorry, not a correlative, a causal. Pardon me. You said that I can't demonstrate a causal. Right. Pardon me, a causal relationship in the brain and the mind, except I can provide strong.
I didn't say that.
What I heard you say, here's your chance to correct me. What I heard you say is that I can demonstrate that these things are associated, and nobody doubts that. But I'm how do you say, committing a correlation versus causation fallacy. That I'm saying here's a correlation, therefore it must be causal. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? But the problem is that I actually can provide evidence for that causal relationship, because if we change the brain, we can equally change the mind in the same measure. And we,
again, he switched terms. He went ahead and said it correctly. You can change the mind, but the consciousness is always observing the mind. He doesn't change that part, though.
You can do it predictably and testably. Now, that you may not like those things, but my question to you remains, do you have a single bit of evidentiary, like anything, to demonstrate that you have a similar relationship with non-matter and the same consciousness? Can you manipulate something else that isn't material, or demonstrate some non-actual material connection to this brain and show that the mind changes?
I think it'd be good for him to look into biologist Michael Levin, because he's a biologist, this guy, Forest. I wonder if he's familiar with the work of Michael Levin, who explicitly says that consciousness, or actually mind and, intelligence and other modes of consciousness arise from Platonic forms, which is like a mind substrate type of pattern in nature. It's not physical, yet it definitely supervenes onto the physical. I wonder if he's familiar with Michael Levin's work. I think he would probably benefit from that, in my opinion. Anyways, let's keep going.
Are you intentionally using mind and consciousness synonymously, or is that an accident?
Right.
Because if it's not, then it's just modal confusion.
Yeah.
Is that really where we're going to take the argument? Is that what?
No,
which do you prefer?
It pertains to exactly.
No, see, Forrest, he doesn't get it, man. He doesn't get it. It's not a preference thing. He's accepting mind and consciousness, but each of those words have particular usages in the context of this conversation. You can't confuse the two. Otherwise, you're going to straw man your other man's position unknowingly.
That's what you asked. You said.
And that's the problem with a lot of these conversations, the language.
The reason we created.
If I have a light bulb,
and you said that's obvious, and you're right, it is obvious.
Lamont, if I have a light bulb here, right, and I flip a switch, and electricity goes through the wire, and it turns on the light bulb, right? If I cut the wire, the light bulb turns off. So I can now say that there is some correlation between this wire and this light bulb.
It's the electricity, and the light bulb does not cause electricity. Neither does the wire. Let's see what
is the wire what's making the light bulb work? No, it's electricity, right? But the wire is definitely in control of this situation.
Right, and consciousness is kind of like the electricity, right? It's kind of like a radio. The radio doesn't produce the music. The the sound waves, they come from the cell towers or the antennas, the tower. It picks up, it receives the signal by channeling into it. You can channel into the right frequency and receive the information that produces the music that comes out of the radio. But if you didn't know all that, you could bust the speakers and think, hey, I can bust the speakers and it kills the music. Therefore, I've just proven the radio creates music.
So now we can say, here's the brain, and here's some sort of consciousness, mind, whatever you prefer to say. If I damage,
that's
alter, or destroy the brain,
yeah, it's not a preference, man. It's not a preference. It's a description between mind and consciousness. These concepts are different usages.
If I damage or alter or destroy the brain, then the consciousness changes.
That's the mistake.
Sorry, I got somebody out there cutting my grass. I hope it's not too loud. You guys can't hear this, but it's pretty loud in here.
What's the mistake?
The mistake is you're using mind and consciousness synonymously.
I literally just said whichever one you prefer.
Man, this is frustrating. It's not a matter of preference. The preference comes in when you use it out of context. It's mind in this case. That's the preferred word in the way that you're talking about the brain and.
No, I'm asking you.
Wait. It shows that you're confused though, because the mind is something you have.
I gave it to you. I didn't make a statement. I asked you which you prefer.
Consciousness is something you are.
I don't care which one. I said whichever you prefer.
I think. Are you talking about awareness?
Okay, so show me if you can. Like now that you understand the distinction here, can you give me an example?
Your distinction.
Okay, fine. That's okay.
I would love to have whatever conversation you're having, but I'm stuck.
See, language, man. Language is what makes people think your interlocutor is out of their mind because they don't understand something. It must mean what's being conveyed to me is garbage. It's like, what does that meme say? You're not understanding science doesn't make it untrue. It's kind of the same thing here.
In this one.
Okay, fair enough. Let's get rid of the meta. I'm going to ask you a simple question. Now that you know we're not talking about mind and we're talking about awareness,
said we weren't.
Can you? That's fine. Don't take it personally. Maybe I misunderstood. I'll put it on me. Here's the question.
Thing to get hung up on.
Can you give?
It's not a stupid thing, man. It's stupid not to make the distinction. This is the thing. When you talk to materialists, a lot of materialists, they love to hide behind semantics this way. The same thing with Christians. They do the same thing. Because they don't understand how words work. Then it must mean it's false or it's true because they don't understand how words work. It's ridiculous, man.
And you give that same causal principle between brain states and consciousness. I'm not talking about mind. I'm talking about consciousness, which is pre-mental. Your mind develops. I'm not talking about that. That's something you have. I'm talking about what you are.
Are you talking about? So, I think. Are you referring to just like the brute fact of like awareness, as in like animals have awareness, and so do like humans. And when we like change the brain, that awareness can show up differently. Like you can have different thoughts and different ideas, but that awareness is still there. Is that the substance you're talking about?
Now you're getting it. You're understanding it. A housefly has awareness.
Right.
Its mind is less developed and less capable of development than the human mind, because the human mind is correlated with a very powerful brain. So I'm not talking about mind. We agree on that mind and brain are correlated. I'm talking about pure subjectivity, awareness from which mind emerges and develops.
Now, I think, right, so here's where I can try to like give some of my slight
See, they'll think this is totally crazy, forgetting that their whole idea of all this stuff comes from matter is actually an appearance in consciousness. They forget that. They rely on consciousness to explain consciousness. So they explain, so that what they'll tell you is that in my consciousness, I see matter, which is an abstraction as it turns out. And this abstraction will explain the abstraction of consciousness. It really doesn't make a lot of sense.
biological understanding. So we know that like humans, as they develop, like fetuses, for example, at 24 to 28 weeks, we start to see like connections in the, I'm going to try to say it right, but the hypothalamo-cortical connections start to happen. And that's when we know that something like consciousness begins to arise. Again, biologists are still having a super hard time with consciousness. It's a difficult thing. We do know that, again, matter is greatly associated with like this conscious experience. And I think this is where again, I start to get to this, with this confusion of like what you mean by existing mind independent. Because like, I think you gave some sort of, you gave something, but it didn't really, I think, point to me of like what something existing really means. Like if we know that like, from everything that we've seen thus far, that you need some of these connections and something like a braid, right, to form this experience. Where are you getting this idea that this awareness exists outside of this matter thing we got in our head? You know, I think that's kind of where,
well,
again, I could be misunderstood.
I think, I think another piece of evidence for this is that our brain only gives us a filtered version of consciousness. We have limited access to the light spectrum.
Look at Forest Valkai. He is just checked out. He thinks that this whole line of reasoning is just idiotic. He just doesn't get it, man. See, this is how when you assume that your assumptions aren't assumptions. So you're not even aware that you're assuming anything. You're just taking it for granted that matter and materialism is true. And so, yeah, it's going to break down. It's going to obviously look crazy.
Yeah, the first thing you learn in acoustic and articulatory phonetics, which is what I'm studying right now in cognitive science, that the universe is essentially silent. So when a sound wave goes into your ear, the eardrum vibrates, the cochlea translates that vibration into electrical signals. None of that is sound. The universe is actually silent. So what science is telling us is that most of the things that you take for granted, such as the bookshelf behind Forest, if you look at those books, right, the colors, those are transjective properties. They're not objective. The shape of the books, the texture of the books, all like your brain is making all of that up right now.
Forrest's brain can't stand this conversation. You can tell. Transjective. He don't want to hear all this. This is. For him, this is all word salad.
Now, right? And you're seeing a very low resolution image of reality. So I'm saying, what is mind independent reality like? And I think it is purely subjective because the objective distinction depends on the brain. So when the brain goes, that's all that goes. That's what goes with it. Objectivity.
Right. But is that so I think we're presuming that this mind independent reality, this gets into those different questions, but let's presume that there is some reality that exists outside of our minds, right? Is that what you're calling consciousness?
Yes, that's what I'm calling pure awareness. Yeah.
I think that's just like, it's almost like using the wrong word, right? I think that like consciousness and the way that we know it describes like almost like the way in which we kind of self-interrogate. It's again, like let's call it this awareness thing. If we didn't have without a single awareness, there's nothing to be aware. So I think a better way to describe that is just like unfiltered reality. I don't know if the right word to use is consciousness for that. I mean, I guess I think that's just like the biggest thing, right? I think that we're all, again, animals, bugs, insects, anything living is experiencing this outer world that we're presuming exists, right? Differently. But to presume that outer world is then like pure consciousness or something, I think that would then be, to me, the leap. But I can take it to Forrest now or anyone else.
Yeah.
I
What is a better candidate? And maybe that's for both of you, and then I'll get off the line.
Yeah, that's that bad question you shouldn't ask. That's what Joel said. You shouldn't ask what's a better candidate because, you know, that's what he says. But it does make you wonder if it's so ridiculous to assume consciousness is the fundamental substrate of reality. Why is the assumption that materialism? Why is that assumption justified? How is that assumption justified? Consciousness is the primary thing we know. Since you want to take it to epistemology, guys, consciousness is primary. All of your inference, logic, thinking, all of that are, you know, mental modes that arise in consciousness, not the other way around.
You go ahead first, Zina.
Okay, no worries. I think that when you posit that God definitely exists, I think our goal, right, as the dissenters, is not to posit an alternative, but more to interrogate where you're coming from with this claim that you're making. I think that it just, when you're describing...
Okay, so you're dissenters, so it's not your job to come up with, oh, that's a cop-out. That's an easy way to, the easiest job in the world is to be a critic, right? That's the easiest thing to do, is to tear things down and point out the problems. Okay. But they're not considering the problems brought up about materialism. I guess those problems aren't important. That's just the default. It's materialism is the default because it's so intuitive when science has already showed us how our intuitions can be wrong and how our feelings can be wrong. People think free will is real and exists because they make choices. But you've got a lot more evidence now that free will may just be an appearance of consciousness, like an illusion of the mind. That actually free will doesn't exist at all. It isn't real at all. It's just an illusion because we don't know the future. And so we stress about the future, and when we make choices, we tell the story to ourselves that, I freely chose to do this instead of that. Now, maybe we do, but it seems like most materialists don't believe in free will. And if that's the case, then the same reasons for rejecting free will can be used to reject materialism. It's an assumption, it's an illusion. We know it is because we have experiments of illusions and how we get it wrong and how the brain works and all of that. So
having unfiltered reality or mind-independent reality as consciousness, I don't think that we see that to just be the case in anything that we've seen, again, like kind of Forrest has been saying. And I think that that's just almost like, how can consciousness that must be self-aware or must be aware, does pure awareness really exist if it's not a subject in and of itself? I think this is kind of where we get into like a whole different other category issue. But I mean, that's kind of just where...
Well, that's a good point. The subject-object split is how consciousness creates mind. Then you have objects, you have contents within the awareness, but you can also have awareness without the contents, right? Show me the contradiction.
Where my thoughts are lying, and yeah, Forrest, you can take it away.
I just want to throw out there, the answer to your initial question remains yes, because when I was saying that I have, a reason to assume or a reason to support this correlative causal relationship between matter and consciousness or mind or whatever you like to call it, and you threw a fucking tantrum about like, no, they're different things. I said that on purpose. I meant either. Yeah,
but you're just making the conversation harder than it has to be. That's why he went through all the trouble to make definitions. And I think mind and consciousness should have been emphasized at the beginning as different concepts.
Either one. So the answer, the question that you then followed up with and said, you're telling me that you think that there's a reason to say that consciousness itself is dependent? Yes, that's why I said that. I said it that way on purpose. I've been saying the same thing for this entire time. We are now 33 minutes into the call. I have a whole whiteboard full of notes about your God, and we haven't touched them because we've been sitting here arguing about the difference between consciousness and mind and matter and whether or not nothing can think. And I don't see any point in going forward. So, like, Lamont, if you want.
He never said nothing can think. There's no such thing as nothing. That's a incoherent concept, number one.
Want to try again sometime, and maybe we can talk about like the God? I would love to do that, but like it's not going to get anywhere if it's this kind of just semantic nonsense where.
See, and that's the problem. This is why I made that video the other day about the ineffability and how language is ineffable, or actually non-dualism is ineffable. And language can't really capture idealism in this concept because language is a descriptor. It's a tool we use to differentiate, and whenever you start using dualistic language to describe some indivisible oneness, monism, then it just breaks down. A semantic collapse happens, and it's really hard to get these things out. And so we have techniques like paraconsistent logic to kind of make sense of certain things that fall into that category. And I think this conversation in some ways actually falls into that category sometimes, especially when we talk about dualism versus non-dualism, because it's easy to get hung up on these concepts and then forget that materialism is assuming dualism, and we're assuming dualism is the correct ontology, the fundamental nature of reality. And it doesn't prove any of that. It just proves that, there's a dualistic appearance, and it's a relation. It's how we relation. And it's not a contradiction. It's just contrast. Contrast is there for a reason. It's not anything that would defeat the metaphysic of idealism or non-dualism. So anyways, I just wanted to go through that video, man, and kind of like look at it with you guys as I'm watching it too, and talk about it. I'm not making any sense today. Anyways, I'm gonna end this stream in this video. Y'all be good.